Welcome to the Rockabye Revenue Podcast with me, Abby Watson. I'm a mum of 4 and a business strategist, and I train people to become hypnobirthing teachers. In the last decade, I've built a thriving baby business that grew beyond my wildest dreams. This podcast is for you if you run a business or dream of running a business in the birth and baby industry. You want to change lives whilst making more money. I'm talking about creating sustainable income whilst being present for the people that matter most. I believe for our baby businesses to have the impact we desire, we must be rewarded. On this podcast, expect me to share actionable strategies without the jargon. I've been where you are. I've built a business while raising 4 little ones, and now I'm here to help you turn your passion into profit while creating the life you've always dreamed of. So let's get started. Hello and welcome to this episode of Rockabye Revenue Podcast. I am so glad you are here today. I'm talking about something a little bit different today, and I'm going to be doing quite a personal share, and I've got to admit, I feel a little nervous, like we do when we're going to share something that feels pretty vulnerable, pretty open, you know? But I know there will be someone listening that really needed this message today. And that's absolutely why I am sharing what I am sharing today. So I'm going to be talking to you about how I've chosen to make my biggest challenges in my life actually my biggest motivations. And I'm going to take you to 3 points in my life. And the third one is actually my current situation. And talk about how that always pushes me forward in my business. And how I use those challenges to help drive me forward. To help be that motivation on days where I feel like, oh my gosh, what am I doing? Who am I to do this? You know? On those days where I feel like, oh gosh, wouldn't it be just easier to be a stay-at-home mum or get a regular job? The motivation on those times where I really need it. So, I'm going to take you back to growing up. So I am, as we speak, 39. I will be 40 in March. So I'm taking you back a few decades. And when I was growing up, I had the most wonderful upbringing. Like, I cannot be any more grateful for the wonderful family life I had growing up. Okay. And we were really quite poor. And what I mean by that is we were not the family that had a car. We were not the family that even had a phone at points in my childhood. You know, and I don't mean a mobile phone. I'm not that young, you know? I mean an actual house phone. I were on free school meals a lot of my childhood that often I wouldn't even claim because I was so embarrassed that anybody would notice. And as much as we had this wonderfully loving home environment and our home was lovely, you know, it was filled with, it looked pretty much internally like a beautiful cottage, but it was a council house. And as much as we had this beautiful, loving family setup, I really did crave something different for my future. And it really makes me feel uncomfortable saying that out loud because I do feel really aware that people could listen to this and, you know, feel that, yeah, I'm like undermining what a wonderful upbringing I had. What I'm saying is I looked at how my mum and dad did struggle with money, how they wanted us to have certain things and we couldn't. And I wanted something different growing up. And that challenge did motivate me daily as a child. I used to think about what I wanted my life to be like as a grown-up and how I wanted to have a really good job and a salary that paid well. I wanted to be able to have a car and I wanted to be able to live in a really nice place. And I wanted to, to not have to think about money and what I couldn't have all the time. I wanted to dress like everybody else and not feel like I had to have like the rubbish makes and all that, the types of things that we think matter when we're teenagers that we know really doesn't matter. So what I did was I used to imagine that when I was older, I would become a teacher. I was obsessed with playing schools as a child. It was actually the only game I ever played. I'd be the teacher, of course. Nobody ever got a chance of doing that. And I would imagine that when I was older, I would become a school teacher. I knew exactly how much school teachers earn, and I knew I'd be comfortable, I'd get out of a council estate and I'd live a good life. And I was so focused on that, It was what my imagination was filled with. I even used to get the Argos catalogue and circle all the things that I would buy for my house once I had that job. Now, that dream of being that secondary school teacher, being that school teacher absolutely did come true. I made it happen. I followed all the steps that I needed to do. It motivated me to be, so good at school and do all my revision because I knew where I was going and that's what I wanted to do. So I took that feeling of wanting something different and it was the thing that really pushed me on. Now, you're listening to this today and you know that I am no longer a school teacher. I'm no longer a school teacher because after I had my first baby, I went back to my job as a secondary school teacher and I just couldn't hack it. I'd changed, my life had changed, the job had changed, and I just didn't want it anymore. Before I'd had my baby, I'd literally lived and breathed teaching. It felt so much part of my identity. And when I had Harris, I changed. I wanted to be with my baby. I didn't want to be dropping him off at nursery at the crack of dawn to pick him up later, to then, spend a bit of time with him and then have to crack on with data collection and marking. I didn't want that life. And I made a really brave decision to come away from teaching temporarily, to leave teaching, to be a stay-at-home mum. And I guess in the moment, it was totally the right decision. And I loved being at home with my boy again. And I was pregnant with my second baby and I had my second baby and I loved being at home. But I guess looking back, that whole determination to have freedom financially and, have dreams for a really comfortable life and all that was still there, They were still there from that 14-year-old me. And that's when I knew I couldn't be a stay-at-home mum forever, But what on earth was going to fit around my life with my two very young children? And as you probably know, that's when I became a hypnobirthing teacher, even though I felt like I had so many reasons not to do it. But I knew that as much as I wanted to be with my children, I also wanted money for myself. I also wanted that freedom that I know having money can bring. So that's how being brought up without money has been one of my biggest motivations. I want to take you a bit further down my life and talk about something more recent. And this was a real challenging time for everyone, I am sure. And that was lockdown. 2020, I'd not long returned back to my business after taking some time out after having my fourth baby, Betsy. And I got back to my hypnobirthing business and was loving it. Was loving back teaching my group courses, my one-to-ones, and it was fabulous. And then you know what happens next? March came and suddenly the whole country was in lockdown. And as a hypnobirthing teacher that taught my group courses in person and I went to people's houses for one-to-one courses, I felt like my business was over. Add to that, I saw that my past clients were potentially having to go to their place of birth alone and not have their birth partners join them for a long time in labour. And I felt like, oh my gosh, like, how can I possibly make a difference when all this is going on? Luckily, I soon realised that, that was actually just a bit of a panic response. And as much as women were facing huge obstacles in terms of their births because of the lockdown, oh my goodness, they needed my services more than ever. And even though I viewed myself as a massive technophobe, I did take my classes online and continue to run hypnobirthing, even though we couldn't be in the same room. Now, this is not what I'm here to talk about, okay? Lockdown on a personal level hit me hard. It really did. At first, I was kind of enjoying the novelty of, not having anywhere to go, not having anyone like pop into the house like unannounced. It felt like, there was a bit of breathing space. But my postnatal anxiety that I had following Betsy's birth really stepped up a gear. A big trigger for my anxiety is health. And with all the talk of, deadly illnesses, because that's how it was presented at the time, absolutely petrified me. My anxiety was on overdrive. I don't deal well with change either, so suddenly not having the routine that I'd had previously, again, triggered every bit of my anxiety. So this was a really challenging time and I felt really low at times, really low. And I felt almost like bad, and I probably never really admitted this to many people at all, because I almost felt bad saying that when, people were losing members of their family, and there was like so much publicity about families in lockdown that were in tiny flats, and, we had this nice house with a big garden, so I felt like it wasn't valid for me to feel that way. Now, this really challenging time really felt like I needed something to do, something positive to focus on. And whilst maybe some people chose that, they'd use this time to motivate themselves to get into exercise. That is not me. I am allergic to exercise. So that was not me doing the Joe Wicks stuff at all. What this time motivated me to do was do the thing that I had been talking about for years, but had thought that I'll wait for the right time. For a few years previously, I'd been talking about, to those really close to me, how I'd love to have my own training school one day. So at the time I was teaching hypnobirthing and I was doing really well with it. But I always dreamed of training others to do what I was doing, But I felt like I needed to wait until my life looked really different. Maybe my youngest was at school or certainly in preschool. So there was always another time. There was always something to wait for. So I'd never done it. And there I was sat with 4 children in lockdown. My youngest just turned a year old. And my eldest, how old was Harris? He was 7. My eldest 7, my youngest 1. And I don't know why this came to me, but literally I thought to myself, I'm just going to do it. Now or never, I'm going to do it. I'm going to take the plunge. I'm going to find out the logistics of taking what I was offering to expectant parents and training others to do it, and meaning they'd be certified and recognised as a hypnobirthing teacher. And I am someone that fears complexity. I don't know if there's anybody else that feels that way too, but I absolutely overcomplicate things and make things feel in my head like they are going to be so much more complicated than they actually are. So I'd even overcomplicated things like, how do people get insured if they train with me? And I felt like I can't ring up insurance providers because I don't know the ins and outs of this. They're going to ask me this, they're going to ask me that. So all these little things felt a big thing, but I did it. And you know what? When I look back on 2020, when I launched my hypnobirthing teacher training course, it blooming changed my life, I'm sat here and I earn more money than I ever imagined I'd earn. And I'm grateful for that. But I'm also truly grateful for the positive focus and the motivation that challenging time brought. Sometimes when we're feeling like we don't have much control or things are not great, when we give ourselves something new and fresh that lights us up to focus on, my goodness, it changes everything. And that's absolutely what taking the plunge and launching my hypnobirthing teacher training did for me. The time was not right. I was recording training videos while my kids played in the garden because I couldn't get them out of the house because it was lockdown. It was not perfect, I was sat sometimes while my kids watched a bit of TV, writing the copy for my website. It was not perfect. And sometimes, perhaps all the time, we have to take action when the stars are not all aligned, before we've got all our ducks in a row. And maybe, just maybe, that challenging time is the thing that actually helps you move forward. And that's absolutely what lockdown did for me. So if you're still with me, thank you so much for listening. I'm going to take you to the here and now. Sitting here recording this podcast, my 4 children at school. And this year has probably been the hardest year of my life. It truly has. My business has thrived. It's been wonderful. However, my personal life has just been so hard. Approximately a year ago, my eldest son suddenly couldn't write. He couldn't cut up his dinner. He couldn't do things that previously he'd struggled with but could absolutely do. His mental health took a huge hit. He didn't want to go to school. This happy boy that, filled our lives with laughter seemed like he was depressed. Now, Harris had always been on the waiting list to be assessed for autism. There'd been so many signs before that. But what on earth was going on? We had people ringing, saying, if I was you, I'd take him to A&E because the paediatrician's not seeing you quick enough. This boy needs an MRI. It was the most scariest time in my life, because if you've ever experienced feeling like there's something seriously wrong with your child, it's the most scariest thing ever. Now, thank goodness he had all the tests. He had MRIs, he had genetic testing, he had all sorts of tests, and nothing, life-threatening, serious in the way that we thought came up, which is such a relief. So we had this huge relief, but we also had so many other things to contend with. We still had a child that was so not himself. He didn't want to go to school still. School were incredible. They were so supportive. They were probably some of the only people in our lives that truly understood what we were going through, because they were seeing it firsthand too. They were incredible, and God, I'll always remember just some of the kind and lovely things they said. But yeah, we were still there with our child deeply distressed, and he was assessed for autism and he was diagnosed autistic, and some other special needs were flagged as well. And of course, as a parent, I felt truly awful. Like, how could my child be diagnosed at age 11? No wonder he had this huge, maybe it was a burnout, like maybe that's what the regression was. Who knows? But it was awful. And as a parent, my gosh, isn't the blame, the guilt just so awful? When he was assessed and diagnosed, oh my gosh, it was like, those, like, what they're called, those images you look at, I can't think of what they're called, and it can either be like a rabbit or a duck, like an optical illusion, that's what I'm looking for. And you see a rabbit. Well, when he was diagnosed, suddenly we saw a duck, and the duck had always been there, and suddenly we could see it. We could also then see it in our other children. Those things that we struggled with as a family, I thought everybody everybody struggled with, you know? I thought the things they were like, friendship-wise and in public, and the things they were scared of and like reacted to, I thought all children did. And there we were in this position where I was like, oh my gosh, perhaps they're autistic too, and they could do with it identifying so that they understand themselves, and what happened to our eldest doesn't happen to them too. So of course we went down the route of diagnosis, and at this point 3 out of 4 of my children have been diagnosed, with my other child currently in the process. The workload that has come with advocating for them, the workload that has come with supporting their needs has been huge. The emotions that has come with coming to terms with this. And, you know, that sounds so awful because it's not a horrible thing to come to terms with. But I'm sure anybody who's been on this journey will understand there is absolutely a process of grief, you know, a process of deep worry about the future and what that might look like, you know. And then, of course, on top of that, you've got your regular life challenges. This year has been so hard and has so mentally been difficult to deal with. And in these challenges, of course, I had thoughts, plans to give up my business. How could I be a mum of 4 children with additional needs and run a business? You know? How could I be there for them and deal with all the life admin and all the extra calls and extra support that comes with it, and also run a business? How am I going to deal with that? So, of course, the only obvious thing to do felt like get out of my business, sell it, close it down. And maybe then I'll feel better, you know? Maybe then I'll feel less overwhelmed and I'll feel less anxious. Thank goodness I did not do that. I can be very impulsive at times. Luckily, I was not impulsive when I had those thoughts. What I came to realise was, at this time in my life, parenting children with additional needs, what do I need more than anything? I need a business that gives me freedom to be with them. And that's exactly what this business does. That's exactly what I support other people to do. I needed that more than ever. And when I look at my children, who are incredible people, and I know we all think that about our children, but do have challenges that not all kids have. When I look at them, I do worry about what the future might look like for them. And you know what? Most likely working in an office, working for somebody else, being told what to do all the time, most likely will not suit them. So actually, how flipping important is it that I demonstrate to them how to run a business that is based on your strengths, your passions, what you are good at, where you don't have to throw yourself out of your comfort zone every single day. That is more important than ever. And that's absolutely now my biggest motivation. I want to show my children what is possible for them. I want to show my children that work doesn't have to be something that's dreaded, you know? I also know that parenting children with additional needs costs more. It absolutely costs more. And if I earn well, absolutely impacts what we have as a family to help look after and meet the needs of our children. That is more important now than it ever has been. So this is how I have made the most challenging time in my life my biggest motivation. And at times where I feel like, oh, can I do that? Just like starting this podcast. Can I do it? Who am I to do this? I remember why I'm doing it. I remember why this is so important. And I make that motivation so much bigger than my fear. And that's what I invite you to do too. If this episode resonates with you and you know somebody who could also benefit from listening to this podcast episode, do me a favour, do them a favour, and send it over to them. You never know what impact it might have. So thank you so much for listening to this episode. It's been a tricky one, but I'm so glad you've been here. Take care, and I shall speak to you soon. Bye. Thank you for listening to Rockabye Revenue. I hope this episode has left you with some fresh ideas and bundles of motivation. If you enjoyed this episode, do make sure you click subscribe so you never miss an installment. And if you found this episode useful, I'd love you forever if you leave a 5-star review, helping this podcast reach the ears of more of the helpers in this world. And remember, keep changing lives. See you next time.